Hi guys, my name is Esther Seitz, cellist of the Bowery Trio, and welcome to our very first Cello Monday. Today's topic on Cello Monday is going to be scales. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do I practice scales? And if you have that question, it's totally okay. I think a lot of times we're told to practice scales, but we don't always get told how to do so and how to do so effectively. If this reminds you of how you're practicing scales, then keep watching. The first step in practicing scales effectively is deciding which key you're going to practice. So sometimes, depending on what repertoire you're playing, you might want to practice a certain scale that correlates to that piece of repertoire. So maybe if you're practicing the Elgar Cello Concerto, you want to practice an E minor scale, and that's totally okay. But I would also suggest working around the circle of fifths when you're practicing your scales, and I'll show you a picture of that here.
This is what is called the circle of fifths. This chart lays out each key signature with the major and relative minor keys that correspond with it. It is called the circle of fifths because the keys move around the circle in intervals of a fifth, C to G, G to D, and so on. The circle of fifths is helpful in scale practice because it serves as a visual tool to help you become more familiar with your key signatures. It also gives you a path to follow when you're trying to decide which key to practice your scales in. For example, I like to focus on one set of keys per week. Sometimes per practice session, it just depends on how I'm feeling, but I would recommend starting with one set of keys per week. So for 1 week, I will focus on C major and A minor. And the next week, I can just move to the next space on the circle, which is G major and E minor if I want to move clockwise, or F major and D minor if I want to move counterclockwise. Either way, you will eventually travel through each set of keys and end up back at C major.
The second step in practicing your scales efficiently is to regulate your tempo. Using a metronome is an excellent tool to help you practice your scales. Not only does it help regulate your tempo and make sure you don't rush or drag, but it also helps you to play more cleanly. The way the metronome does this is by helping you sync your right hand movements with your left hand movements. This is really important because in the end, this kind of practice will give you a nice, clean, and polished sound while you play your scales. I like to set my metronome at quarter note equals 96 beats per minute to practice scales. This is the way I was taught by one of my teachers, and it's been effective for me, so I want to share it with you. You can really choose any tempo that you feel is comfortable for you, just make sure it's steady. So for instance, if you were to play at 96 beats per minute to the quarter note, I would start with half notes first, 2 notes for bow, like this. Then you would bump it up to quarter notes, 4 notes per bow, like this. bump it up to eighth notes, 8 notes per bow, like this. And you're starting to see a pattern here. Then I would bump it up to triplets, 12 notes per bow, like this. And finally, 16th notes, 16 notes per bow, like this. You can also add notes to the beginning and end of your scale to make it even if you'd like. This is how you do that. Third step, the bow. You might have noticed that I was slurring notes while I played my scales. You can definitely play scales with separate bows, and there is a time and a place for that, but for general technical practice, I strongly recommend slurring your notes. Slurring your notes allows you to better hear what's happening in the right hand and in the left hand, and what the relationship between the two is. You'll be able to hear your shifts really clearly as well, and that's a really important part of playing your scales. The fourth thing I want to talk about is sound. There are a few things that you should keep in mind while you're practicing your scales that relate to your sound. First of all, no vibrato while you're playing your scales, and no harmonics either. This helps us to hear the pitch really accurately and to assess whether it's in tune or out of tune. Secondly, also have a nice full mezzo forte sound. You can experiment with playing forte, piano, or whatever dynamics you want, but for a general technical practice, I would say have a nice mezzo forte, nice full sound, and nice full bows. Thirdly, make sure you focus on having a smooth legato line even through string crossings. This is really important and will help you develop your legato sound. A couple of other things to focus on while you're practicing scales. Focus on having a nice concrete hand position. Make sure your fingers feel stable and that you're moving your hand as a unit. If you make a mistake or keep making a mistake in a certain spot of the scale, isolate that problem, fix it, and then put it back into context. Doing this will allow you to learn faster and more efficiently. During your scale practice, you should also make sure that you're relaxed. Focus on your posture, make sure you're not tensing anything, and try to play as relaxed and effortlessly as possible. And lastly, if you're having a lot of trouble with intonation, you can practice with drones. I like to use cello drones, and you can find these on YouTube, Spotify, and probably some other streaming platforms as well. I'll make sure to link these in the description box. And that's all we have for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into Cello Monday. I hope these tips really help you to feel a little less intimidated about practicing scales and give you some direction. I know that when my teacher taught me these tips, it really helped me level up my playing and feel more confident about my scales. Make sure to tune in next week for our next episode of Cello Monday, where we'll talk more about efficient ways to practice your technique.